So my first reaction to Jewel Lotus, of course, was confusion. I thought that it was a fake card. It's not. Um, but no, it doesn't mean it's the end of the reserve list. And no, this is not going to affect the price of Black Lotus either. Um, but what it does is it does establish an extremely dangerous precedent. Um, Unfortunately, it pretty much just opens up everything on the reserve list for reprint now in a commander context. Dual lands, I think, are extremely dangerous to hold right now because most of the demand for dual lands comes from EDH. And if you offer a cheaper substitute, it's going to decrease the price of them. In the long run, do I think it's going to hurt the price of any reserve list staple that sees a functional reprint? No, not really. It's probably going to be okay. But it does show that Wizards is getting extremely creative and really trying to push the limits as far as good faith and the spirit of the reserve list agreement. So I personally am not going to be holding on to the big pile of duels and stuff that I have right now. I'm definitely going to start unloading some of those. That's my personal take on it. You don't need to do that. Nobody has to do that. It's simply about risk tolerance. I don't ever look at Magic as a very, very serious investment. I prefer real estate. So, if I can unload duels and put that towards, a down payment on an investment property, I'd rather do that, right? It's clear that this is not here to stay. So, why smash your head against the wall and try and, you know, why fight it? Just like it is what it is. But yeah, so one of the things that you have to understand is that functionally identical is kind of the key here, right? Wizards will not reprint a card that is considered functionally identical to another card. Okay, and yes, technically, Jeweled Lotus is not functionally identical to Black Lotus because it has an extra clause which restricts it to only produce that mana for casting your commander. However, the largest and fastest growing format is EDH or Commander. And at a certain point, if that becomes the most widely played format to a significant degree, then you could simply make the argument that it is basically Magic, that is really what Magic is. And if you reach that point and you're printing cards that are functionally identical minus a simple qualifier for a specific format, then the card is essentially functionally identical to the card that it was a reprint of. And what it also means is you could make a Jeweled Lotus for artifacts. You could make a Jeweled Lotus, for even CMC cards. I mean, it's entering a design space that hadn't really been done. The closest we ever had to a Black Lotus reprint, of course, was Lion's Eye Diamond. But the drawback to Lion's Eye Diamond was so incredibly detrimental to your game state back when it was printed that it just really wasn't considered to be a powerful or viable card. I even remember back in probably the mid 2000s, Lion's Eye Diamond was maybe $30, $40. It was not really that strong. And that's only because it had started to see play in some Dredge decks. Prior to Dredge, Lion's Eye Diamond just didn't really have that much of a home. Yes, it had some use, but it just wasn't there. So you couldn't even come remotely close to making the argument that Lion's Eye Diamond was a functional or functionally identical reprint of Black Lotus. Jeweled Lotus, however, is, for all intents and purposes, a functionally identical reprint of Black Lotus. But no, it's not going to affect the price of Black Lotus. It just simply will not affect it. Black Lotus is expensive because it is an incredibly iconic card. It is, hoarded by collectors. The price of it already isn't real. The price of it is made up by collectors who decide on, arbitrary values for a card price. There's nothing, it's a piece of cardboard at the end of the day. So you can't make the argument that Black Lotus really has any intrinsic value beyond the fact that it's a collectible. Jewel Lotus is not collectible, and it's in no way Black Lotus, so it's not going to appeal to collectors. So the value simply isn't going to be there, and it's not going to hurt the price of Black Lotus at all. I'm not saying that this means reserve list card prices are going to tank across the board. No, I'm saying that this means you are going to see a lot of nearly or functionally identical minus a single irrelevant parameter because of the format it's played in. You're going to see functionally identical reprints of reserve list staples in EDH that are functionally identical only that aren't functionally identical only because of a commander clause, which is irrelevant in a format that is commander. So that's really the point here. So substitutes play an incredibly powerful role in pricing, in market pricing of any products, whether it's watches, whether it's, handbags, sweatshirts, whatever it is, shoes. And this is something that you've always kind of seen, and probably not everybody really realized this. But the reality is reprints come in two forms. There are the direct reprints, the actual just reprint of a card, and then there are the functional reprints. And then there are the power creep reprints. So I guess technically there's really three. An identical reprint of a card that looks the same is obviously the closest you could come to a substitute, right? That's basically, from a market perspective, that's almost the same as a counterfeit. It's a lower priced version of the original that serves the same function and is almost indistinguishable quality-wise. That's changed a little bit with the card quality becoming trash in the last 5 years. But other than that, a reprint is basically a substitute for all intents and purposes, or even you could argue it's almost a counterfeit. Obviously, it's not a counterfeit, but from a price impact perspective, it's as if the market got flooded with counterfeits when you have a mass reprint of a card. The next you have is the functional reprint, which is something like, so Bayou into Overgrown Tomb is not a functional reprint for the simple reason that you have to pay the 2 life. And why is Jeweled Lotus a functional reprint of Black Lotus, but Overgrown Tomb is not a functional reprint of Bayou? So the biggest reason is that Jeweled Lotus is being played in the biggest format and designed for the biggest format in Magic, right? Overgrown Tomb, yes, it's also designed for a bunch of different formats, but at the time it was made for standard and then extended. And losing 2 life is going against the goal of the game, right? It's going against your goal of trying to win. You want to maintain as high life as you can and get your opponent's life as low as you can to kill them. Jeweled Lotus, the drawback, quote unquote, for Jeweled Lotus is almost irrelevant because it's already advancing your board state in the direction you want to go. It's not making you pay life. It's not doing anything. It's literally just preventing you from spending it on other cards, but you can use it on your commander. And with the amount of, we'll get into commanders later. So that's why it's more of a functional reprint than even Overgrown Tomb or pretty much everything you've seen at this point in the game as far as reprints of reserve list cards go. Then we have the Triomes. The Triomes enter tapped with no ability for them to come in untapped other than other cards that influence whether or not lands come into play tapped. Because of that, Triomes are not a functional reprint and not even close to functional reprint territory of a dual land. I do like Triomes a lot. I don't know what the prices are off the top of my head now, but if they're cheap, I do want to pick some up. I do plan to play them in a lot of my EDH decks. And the reality is, will I probably replace some of my dual lands with Triomes? Yes, especially in my cycling-based decks, I'm going to. So let's go back to the idea of substitutes, right? The more substitutes that you have for any product, the lower the base price of that product will go under normal market conditions. However, when you have something that is being propped up by collectors and hoarders, it does not follow logic. It does not follow normal market reasoning. As a result, the price is a little bit higher or a lot higher in the case of things like a Black Lotus because the value of that card is not about its function, it's about its collectability. All you're going to really see is more dual lands end up in the hands of collectors who value it because of what it is, not because of what it does, whereas most players are simply going to accept the lower priced substitutes. So yes, the availability of low cost substitutes will 100% affect the price of dual lands in the short term, but in the long run, I doubt that it will. And do I think that reprinting dual lands for Commander only is bad for the game? No, I don't. Not at all. I think that you're starting to see, I'll get into this later. There's a split in player base. And there's a split in player philosophy. And those two things really can't coexist. Okay. So Mox Opal, Mox Emerald, Chrome Mox, right? So here we have a Mox. But each one again has a significant drawback that does not really get better in any format, right? So having to remove a card in your hand from the game for Chrome Mox, it sucks. But the reality is that's pretty good still. I mean, that's still good. It is card disadvantage, so it is in no way a functional reprint. And Mox Opal requires 3 artifacts out, which other than, Ornithopters and oh man, I can't remember the guy from Scars of Mirrodin, Memnite. With the exception of Memnites and Ornithopters, this is going to be extremely hard to meet that condition turn 1. So it has a significant drawback. So, realistically, it's not a functional reprint. Whereas, again, Jeweled Lotus does not have a drawback. Yes, it's restricted to spending it on your commander, but that just does not matter. We've already been over this. What does this mean for Black Lotus? I really don't have to go over this again. Feel free to read it if you're a fast reader. I'm just going to move on. So what does this mean for Commander/EDH? I still call it EDH. It is EDH to me and to a lot of players. So yeah, this kind of goes against the spirit of EDH. EDH originally was really intended to be a format that was about interesting, complex, and fun game interactions that you couldn't typically achieve in a normal 60-card format because both the pace of the game and the goal of the players in a 60-card format simply don't align with the idea of fun. Unfortunately, EDH has started to get even more competitive, and this is entirely because of Wizards upping the power creep of cards in that format to sell more cards, to sell more product. And it's not wrong for them to do because they want to make money. And the reality is if you want Magic to exist, you're going to have to accept that a company has to make money off of it, whether it's Wizards or whoever they sell, the IP to. So it doesn't really matter. It's something you have to accept. Do I agree with the direction that they're heading? I completely disagree with it. I think it's extremely wrong, short-sighted, and misguided. But it is what it is, and it's just not my problem anymore. Jeweled Lotus is going to create games with a significant disparity right off the bat. This means you can play Krenko turn 1. It means you can play Arkham Dagson turn 1. It means you can play Grand Arbiter Augustine IV turn 1. It means you can play... I don't know. There's a lot of stuff out there. There's a lot of 4 CMC commanders. I'm sure if you spend 2 minutes, there's people who've made massive lists of all the things that are going to get broken by this and things are going to spike in price. The reality is this card is an auto-include in any 2-color deck, any monocolor deck, and some 3-color decks. It is an auto-include. If you are not running this card, you are at a significant disadvantage over any opponent that is running it and draws it. Is it worth mulliganing the first turn? Possibly, yeah. I could definitely see myself mulliganing for this card turn 1, depending on my deck. Look, you could get Zur out on turn 1 with this card now. You just need something to filter the mana. It really. I guess no, you can't filter the mana. Sorry, you can't get Zur out turn 1. Anyway, yeah, it makes combo decks a lot more dangerous. It also helps aggro decks. Being able to slam an aggressive commander turn 1 and apply pressure, it's good. But the reality is all this is going to do is create even more imbalance in a lot of games. And I just don't think that's healthy for the format. It's going to mean that matches are going to get decided within turn 1, turn 2, which already, kind of happens sometimes when you slap a Mana Crypt, Soul Ring, Island, and some other generic blue Manosaurus, Mox Opal, or whatever it is, turn 1 and play Teferi, which I've done enough times that I know it's ridiculous. Yeah, this does make me pretty excited for my Chainveil Teferi deck, since, it's not even CEDH anymore, because I don't keep up with that format. But I think what the key takeaway from this, from an EDH and format design perspective, is that I think it's really about pretty much time to consider separating EDH and CEDH and having living ban lists for those formats, not to a much more significant degree than we have right now. Yeah, for a format like this, it's really difficult to police 25,000 plus cards or whatever we're at now. But I think that EDH and CEDH need to be separated in a way similar to Modern and Legacy, not from a time standpoint, but from a power level standpoint. Every time a card like Jeweled Lotus it gets printed, it significantly increases the power gap between decks. And when you have play groups with people who have mixed budgets and mixed ideas or deck construction philosophies, this is going to result in more arguments and more people being unhappy. Where are you going to draw the line? Who's going to say that this card belongs in a power level 7 deck versus a power level 5 deck? At what point? Can you draw that line? It's all subjective. It's all based on play groups. When people come together and play in EDH events in stores, it's going to be such a problem. And no, if you walk into a store without this card in your deck and play in a tournament, just go home. Don't bother. Why are you there? Don't waste your money. Just go play with your friends. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with doing that. But this separates the competitiveness of decks in an extremely significant manner. And look, is it too powerful for EDH? No, it's not. It's not too powerful for EDH. Sorry, it's too powerful for EDH. It's not too powerful for CEDH. That's the simple reality of it. And this is kind of the final point, right? Magic has been around for over 25 years. And it means that player ages range anywhere from, 8, 10, 6, whatever years old to, 35, 40 years old. And as a result, you see several different things. First, players who have had their collections for a really long time have been watching card prices go up and up and up and up over time. They're selling their collections to buy cars. They're selling their collections to buy houses. And that's fantastic. It really is a good thing. And I understand people don't like the pricing of the reserve list. I know that. But it's a really great thing. If Magic didn't have that value, even other card games would struggle to exist simply because people don't want to put money into something they know they're going to lose money on. It's why buying a car is so terrible. It's why I hate buying cars. It's why it's just one of the worst financial decisions you can ever make. Yes, I bought BMW. Obviously, I love it. It's a great car. It's so fun, but it's so expensive and it's a terrible investment. And that's what Magic is going to become when the reserve list becomes irrelevant, which it won't until Wizards gets sold. But the point here is that cards need to be able to retain value because of several different things. First, low-income players who do not have discretionary income to spend on this game can still trade up into expensive cards. They can still save up. They can still, grind tournaments and, turn store credit into expensive cards. They can do those things and they can build up a collection to be able to compete with players who can just throw a couple grand at a deck right off the bat. By reprinting cards too frequently, which is a slightly separate subject, but it's important, by reprinting cards too frequently and destroying the equity that these players have built, it makes it harder for them to stay in the game. Yes, it makes the prices lower, but it also hurts the price of people's collections, and there are plenty of people who need to trade cards to be able to buy new cards, okay? When it comes to the reserve list, the entry barrier is simply too high, and as a result, derivative formats are also priced too high for most players. EDH is tough, CEDH is tough, because you need reserve list staples that are expensive, and they're only expensive because of them being on the reserve list, not because of what they do. So yes, I think functionally identical reprints of dual lands for EDH is a perfectly fine place to go. And I think Wizards has to go there now because they've already signaled that they're willing to do it. So for them to not do it is just pointless now. Reserve list hoarders are simply a microcosm of the wealth gap, and that is true. They've had this money long before new players even got into the game, and they're simply not going to be, letting it go for an inexpensive amount of money. So players and Wizards need to turn to a different direction to figure out how to meet those players' needs, and I don't think that's the wrong thing to do for the longevity of this game. But you need to understand that if you weren't there at the beginning of the reserve list, buying into it now, it just doesn't really make that much sense to do. If you want to do it, if you hope it's going to keep going up in price, great, you certainly can. But it's like buying Amazon at 2,800 or whatever. I don't know what it's at today. But it's like it's like buying Amazon at 2,800 versus 1,500, right? Yeah, you're still going to make money on it in the long run, but there's less money for you to make. And so the reality is, for old players who complain about, reserve list cards, getting functional reprints later on down the road, that's great. Sell your collection and leave. Nobody's keeping you here. You don't need to stay in the game. I've been playing since 2006. I have, over the years, amassed large amounts of reserve list staples. I've owned Power. I don't own any more Power. Actually, no, I have a Time Twister still, but it's just unlimited, so whatever. The point is, you don't have to be here. I quit Magic. I'm done with Magic already. I've stopped playing it. I play EDH casually, occasionally with friends, with vastly overpowered and overpriced decks, which is stupid. But I'm very seriously considering selling off the rest of my dual lands and the rest of my staples because I think short term, I don't really want to be holding them. And the reality is I can make more money with that money in real estate or in other places than with Magic cards. The appreciation, it simply isn't there anymore, in my opinion. So look, yeah, this is a massive entry barrier, and there are no good ways to solve it. Let me rephrase that. There are no ways to solve it without making somebody unhappy. And Wizards understands this, and they realize that most of the players who spend money on their game are new players, not players who've been in the game for 20 years, have massive collections, sit on reserve, hoard reserve list staples. Those people aren't spending money. They're not worth anything to Wizards. Wizards doesn't like that player. They don't like that demographic. They don't like that player from a social perspective. They don't represent the attractive young demographic that Wizards is, young diverse demographic that Wizards wants to be the face of the game. So, if you're one of those guys, buddy, the writing's on the wall, and you should be planning accordingly. What do you want? Like, yeah, you can go stand on the edge of the cliff and scream at the ocean or whatever you want to do. Like, this is the reality. This is the future. This is where the game is going, and it's been going this way for a long time. You can't change it. Don't bother trying to. Just accept it and move on with your life. That's the simple reality of it. So just to recap everything, no, this isn't going to be tanking Black Lotus. In no way do I think this is going to tank Black Lotus. No, it's not a direct reprint of Black Lotus, but it is, for all intents and purposes, a functional reprint. And it is slightly scary to see that in the context of the spirit of that good faith agreement, which is the reserve list. It's a little scary to see it because it means that, yeah, you're going to see a lot more of this. And it means that Wizards just doesn't really care that much anymore about really pushing the limits of the design space around the reserve list. So, I made another video about this and people hated it, so I just deleted it. This one is, a much more unbiased and I think logical approach to what this card means. The other one was definitely a little bit more Rudy from Alpha Investments, Sky is Falling. I love Rudy. Great guy. Very fun to watch. But no, I think this is, a little bit more of a level-headed approach, less clickbaity. And yeah, let me know what you think in the comments below. I'll definitely try and respond to stuff. I hope you paid attention and aren't just going to watch 5 minutes and then come at me with reserve list is bad, you're just butthurt, that type of stupid stuff. Be better, guys. Come on.